All right. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Uh, my name is Lou Rosato Birch. I'm the Connecticut Program Director at Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thanks so much for attending our online forum about toxic PFAS chemicals, also known as the forever chemicals. We have a number of CCE members joining us today. Thanks so much for hopping on. This event is being sponsored by the Yale Department of Environmental Health Services. It's being co-sponsored by Clean Water Action Connecticut and the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And I also want to just take a quick second and thank all of our participants. The first 15 minutes of this presentation, you're going to hear from CCE's Executive Director, Adrian Esposito, to give you a little bit of background on what are PFAS. Some of you may be familiar with this topic, some may not. The whole purpose of this event is to hear from you all this evening. So you're going to get a little bit of background from Adrian from about 7:20 until about 7:35. 7:40, we are going to have a presentation featuring Lori Matthew, the Commissioner from the Department of Public Health, and Ray Fragone from Connecticut DEEP to talk about the state's response to this emerging public health issue. And as I said, most importantly tonight is to engage with you, to hear your questions about PFAS, and to hear your concerns. And so the last 20 minutes will be reserved for Q&A so that members of the audience can share their questions and their comments as well. Everyone is going to be muted. And if you have questions during that Q&A period, we ask you to hold on to them. If other questions come up before, you can feel free to add them in the text box. But during the Q&A, what we'll do is folks will be invited to raise their hand if they have questions. And then you'll get an invitation allowing you to unmute yourself so that you can speak up and ask your question. And then one of our panel of experts this evening will be able to address your question. So without any further ado, thank you all again for joining us for a virtual forum. And I am going to pass it off to my Executive Director, Adrian Esposito.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for sharing a little bit of your evening with us. I'm just going to quickly, actually, I'm not even going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to take 10, I think. So, Hannah, you're going to share the screen? And we're going to just put up a brief PowerPoint. Okay. So, tonight we're going to talk about a chemical called PFAS. It's also known as the forever chemical. That's not a good name. It's not a name that is, we give it as an endearing quality. That's not what that is. These chemicals are actually quite abundant, unfortunately. Go to the next slide. These chemicals are very abundant and they are found throughout the drinking water in the United States of America. We're just putting this up here. There will not be a test on this later. You do not have to know how to spell these chemicals names. But the two most common ones are PFAS and PFOA, PFAS and PFOA. But the point being right now is that this is not just a problem of having this chemical in Connecticut's water supply. It's actually a problem throughout our nation. In fact, it is now estimated, believe it or not, that 16 million people in 33 different states have this chemical in their drinking water. So as you can see, it is very widespread. And they're also called the forever chemical because they're very persistent in the environment, but even worse, in our bodies. They don't easily break down and they don't easily go away. Next slide. Okay, so how could they possibly be this abundant, you might ask yourself? Well, we have an answer. They're this abundant because they're used in so many diverse ways in society. The first one, you see that nice fireman there putting out a fire. Well, it turns out that this chemical was used abundantly in firefighting foam. And if we say firefighting foam really quickly, then you're very good. But think about all the fires that have been put out and all the fire training centers where they train our firefighters to put out fires with this foam. And it really, sometimes it just leaked in storing of the firefighting foam. So there's a lot of instances where we find now large concentrations in a water supply or groundwater supply that is traced back to firefighting foam. The second way, though, is I think a lot of people don't realize this, is that it's found in food packaging. And I'm sorry to tell you this, and don't disconnect when I tell you this, but one of the primary food wrappers or food sources is microwave popcorn. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, first, I can't go to the movies, and now I can't even microwave popcorn in my own house. And yes, that's true. You really shouldn't. It really is found abundantly in the microwave popcorn, but also in fast food wrappers. And you know you shouldn't be eating fast food anyway, but there was a study done in 2017 that found that 1/3 of all fast food wrappers in the United States contain PFAS. And what it's used for is it repels water, repels grease, and when fast food companies want to wrap the food, that's what they use. And that same principle as a something that prevents water is means that it's been used in other products like carpet, upholstery, your couch, the inside of your car, the upholstery in the car, because it can be act as a stain guard and a water guard. So, and then obviously clothing, a raincoat or rain boots, whatever. But the other thing that we didn't even list here is there used to be one of the most common products on the market was Teflon. You know, you make up those eggs and you think, my God, they slide right off the pan, but that is in a large part because of the Teflon, which is coated with PFAS. That's been phased out, but if you have old Teflon pans, you should throw them out, frankly. But that's just another way that it got into the food and into the water. Next slide. Okay, so what's the problem with that, you might ask? Well, unfortunately, this chemical has been linked to very serious health impacts. Everything from kidney cancer, testicular cancer, liver and thyroid and immune system functions. We didn't list it here, but also it's an endocrine disruptor, which means that it impacts the development of hormones, and it either mimics them or inhibits them, which either one of those is bad for children, particularly young children in the developmental stages. So as you can see here, we did list developmental effects of fetuses and infants. So unfortunately, this chemical has a wide variety of adverse health impacts associated with it. Next slide. And then obviously, because of all the uses that we just discussed, it goes into our water supply. It either enters it through wastewater, industrial discharge, food packaging that ends up in landfills. As we said earlier, the storage of firefighting foam or just the use of that, all of these different ways. It's not one way, it's a variety of ways that it enters into the environment and enters into water supplies. So what can we do? Well, real quick, next slide, Hannah. Okay, there's a bunch of things we can do. Several states, including Connecticut, which they're going to talk about in just a moment, can adopt safe drinking water standards. We just completed that process in the state of New York. It got interrupted by COVID, but it was completed on August 30th. And New York now has the lowest drinking water standard for PFAS anywhere in the nation at 10 parts per trillion. Many states are banning firefighting foam and they're also banning food packaging from using PFAS. The food packaging is pretty critical, considering that 1/3, as we said earlier, of fast food has this chemical in the wrapper. That is a direct contact that goes directly into us and our children when they eat that. The good news is that PFAS can be filtered through an easy filtration system called carbon filtration. We have that on the market. It is readily available. Water suppliers know about it. They know how to use it. So if PFAS is found, it is successfully treated by a carbon filtration system. So one of the challenges right now, and you might say, well, why is this all up to the states? It's because the EPA has really decided to move at what we call a pre-global warming glacial speed, which means basically not at all. They've been looking at the problem and studying the problem, and they've been putting together an action plan that has no action in it as of yet. So we can't really rely on the EPA, and that's why we're very happy to have partners like the Connecticut DEEP and Connecticut Department of Health, who are crafting and putting together an action plan to protect our water, protect our public health from this. It's called an emerging chemical. So I'm very happy to have the next two speakers, talk about the work that Connecticut is doing to really advance protecting public health from this chemical. Hannah, you could take that off the screen.
All right, thank you, Adrian. That was great. And now we are going to hear from our presenters from Connecticut DEEP and DPH to talk a little bit about what's been happening at the state level to address this issue. Lori, which one of you is going to lead off today?
Well, that's Ray. I don't know. It's up to you who you want to go first.
Flip a coin.
Well, maybe I'll start because
Let's have you start, Lori.
Lou, you gave me a promotion to the commissioner of the Department of Health, so I'm flattered. But I'm a branch chief at the State Department of Public Health in Connecticut over the branch of environmental health and drinking water. And what that is, our agency is a group of 750 people. I oversee 100 people. We oversee primacy of the Safe Drinking Water Act for all and regulate all public water systems statewide. We also have a private well program that works hand in hand with local health directors. And as Adrian mentioned, the impact to public water and drinking water supplies and private wells in particular. That's a big part of my program is water, drinking water, public and private sources of supply. So in Connecticut, a little bit of history about PFAS. Adrian mentioned New York. New York back in 2015, 2016 was testing under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that's one of the reasons why we are here is that the federal government action known as the Unregulated Contaminant Rule, which is part of the Safe Drinking Water Act, was moving forward in the years 2013 to the year 2015. So over that 3-year testing period across the country, every public water system, every large public water system was being tested. Any system that serves for PFAS, for PFOA and PFAS, not for all the thousands of PFAS chemicals that are out there, but for the two that are most prominent. And what EPA does is it's to test for occurrence of the contaminant in drinking water. In New York, in Vermont, in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, these chemicals at the detection levels at the time, back in 2013 to 2015, were found. And infamously, Hoosick Falls, New York, was one of the communities impacted. Bennington, Vermont was another community impacted by PFAS. Westfield, Massachusetts, a town on Cape Cod. It was discovered at that time under the Safe Drinking Water Act rules and there was a determination that these levels were, were quite low. And I detected at the levels that they were found in Hoosick and Bennington in particular, set off a firestorm of those states being very concerned and starting to move forward with setting a maximum contaminant level. As Adrienne had mentioned, New York has set maximum contaminant levels for 2 of the chemicals, PFOA and PFAS. So in Connecticut, you might think, well, what happened here? Did you have a Hoosick Falls or Bennington, Vermont-like situation in Connecticut? Well, we didn't. That was the good news. We did not have a detection at all. But back in that time, in the year 13 to 15, the laboratory detection limits were fairly high. Technology has changed. Laboratory technology limits have come way down from that time, and so much has moved forward. And as Adrienne has also mentioned, EPA has an action plan, but there hasn't been much action moving forward. I would certainly agree with that. And that's been the unfortunate situation that we have. Connecticut was a leader in setting one of the first action levels after EPA, after Hoosick Falls and Bennington, Vermont. EPA set an action level of 70 parts per trillion for a sum of 2 of PFAS chemicals. That was in May of 2016. Connecticut came along and set an action level in December of 2016 of 70 parts per trillion, but a sum of 5. So we were more conservative, and that's where our action level right now sits. It's that same action level. And in the meantime, from 2016 till now, Governor Lamont had back last summer, had come to both agencies, my agency and Ray's agency, DEEP and DPH, and our commissioners, and asked us to pull together a task force and do it very quickly, because the concern was there. Not only, the concern was there because of the concern across New England, New York, and New Jersey, and the heightened awareness by both commissioners brought forward a task force. And there is a task force report. That report was drafted and finalized with a public comment period back in a year ago, right around this time. And so within that process, there were 3 committees. There was one focused on public health. And I'm going to focus on a few of the items that were teed up during that public process that were very important. And I can let you know what we're working on at the moment. So with a public health focus, we know that other states were moving forward with testing of public water supplies and public drinking water supply. So in the year 2018, we decided to move forward with recommendations to our public water systems to test. And that was a pretty bold move on our behalf, because there are no maximum contaminant levels. There's no requirement for a public water system to sample or test. There is, under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the normal process is that EPA will have a contaminant list of contaminants that are concerns across the country. They'll move forward with testing across the country to find out what the occurrence is. And then they'll start the process. If they find a widespread occurrence and widespread public health concern, they will start the process of moving forward to set up a maximum contaminant level. Now that process in a normal time, takes a lot of time, between 3 to 5 years. It has been slowed down, even well beyond what you would consider normal for EPA. So the governor asked us to take swift action to pull together a task force, bring together people, focus in on one area, which was public health. And we looked at all aspects, and we came up with a number of items. We know we need to test more public drinking water, and also the private sources of supply. In Connecticut, we have 2,500 public water systems. We have over 4,000 regulated public drinking water supply wells. We have over 325,000 private wells. And so many of those were not tested under the testing that EPA moved forward with. So there's a lot of testing that needs to happen, and that was one of the first and foremost items of the Public Health Committee. Now since that time, since November, and a year has gone by, a number of our larger public water systems have moved forward with sampling on their own, and under our recommendations. So we've been working on that. We are working on the different sources of human exposure. We are evaluating laboratory capacity and have put in a budgetary request to secure the testing equipment for our state laboratory at the State Department of Public Health. The lab is in the town of Rocky Hill. We are continuing to work with Yale and UConn on outreach and communication and risk communication. And this is one of the efforts that we're glad that Yale is sponsoring, co-sponsoring this event. We're also working on an event with Yale to reach out directly and speak to our local health directors statewide, because it's time to bring them back into the fold. And we've heard a lot about what needs to be shared and what needs to be known, because local health directors in Connecticut, and there's 65 of them, they are the direct regulators of the private wells. And frankly, when you look at the regulations that oversee private wells, there's very little regulation in the way of water quality and drinking water quality. As a matter of fact, you might say there's none. When you first drill a well, you have a requirement to pull a basic sample. But beyond that, once that well is put in the ground, there are no sampling requirements for a private well after that. So we have 325,000 private wells without requirements to sample that water quality nor the water quantity. So one of the most important items that we heard was that in studying what other states have done, and Adrian had mentioned New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, all have some version of a drinking water advisory council that would advise the state health department on setting maximum contaminant levels. In Connecticut, that is not the work that we have undertaken since the passing of the Safe Drinking Water Act in the early 1970s. We don't set maximum contaminant levels at the state level. That is the job of EPA. But because, as Adrian mentioned, and as I have mentioned, that EPA has an action plan, but there's no swift action being taken, we are looking to set up an advisory council to help get started toward development of a maximum contaminant level for PFAS. Now you might say, is that for 2 of them? Is that for 5 of them? Is that for 18 of them? Is that for 1,000 of them? Because there are thousands. The latest number I've heard is over 7,000. So we are still working on that, toward that end. Yes, COVID has delayed this process for the health department. It hasn't COVID delayed everything that we've done in the last 7 months, right? I wouldn't be lying to you if I wouldn't say that COVID has derailed some of our processes, a number of our processes, to do our normal work here at the health department. But we continue to move forward, and just recently, over the last 3 months, have started our work to refocus on PFAS and get our plan back in action. And the one thing we have done throughout all of COVID time is to continue to meet with DEEP and Ray's team. Ray, Shannon, and Anna have been tremendous to work with. And it's been a great partnership over the last 2 years, or 3 years, as a matter of fact, since our staff had gotten together and started working together on this. So there's so much more to come. Adrian, I would say that yes, the treatment seems easy, but the treatment can get complicated quickly because of other contaminants that are found in the ground. And it also can be costly. And so quickly, affordability starts to become problematic. And in our state, we have other wonderful contaminants that are out there that are naturally natural contaminants, such as uranium, arsenic, manganese, that we have to be concerned about as well. So with so much to do, we are, here, Ray and I have presented so many times on PFAS and have done this. We call it the road show, right? Ray? We've been out and talked to so many different groups about what the efforts are. And sometimes you feel like you can't do everything that you want to be able to do. But our focus is testing of public drinking water, education, technical assistance to our local health departments, and setting up this council to get ourselves positioned for setting a maximum contaminant level. And the other item I previously mentioned, the equipment, seeking the equipment for the state laboratory. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray.
Thanks, Lori. And also wanted to say thank you to Citizens Campaign, Adrian and Lou. Greatly appreciate the invitation to come speak to this group this evening. A little bit about what we do in DEEP's remediation division. So our division is responsible for overseeing the investigation and cleanup of polluted sites across the state. It could be everything from our largest Superfund sites to which have these are massive projects with substantial contamination, a variety of contaminants present, that all the way down to fuel oil release in a residential underground storage tank or above ground storage tank. So those are kind of the simplest to the most complex. Now, how does PFAS fit into this mix? Well, this is certainly a very complex and unique contaminant in the way that it behaves in the environment. It's certainly giving us a challenge. It is not your typical contaminant that we see at many of our polluted sites. This one requires special care and handling in the analysis, actually in the sample procurement process, as well as in the analysis. And a quick note, the photo behind me, since we're not giving a PowerPoint presentation this evening, this is more of a conversation. The photo behind me is the aqueous film forming foam. This was the unfortunate incident at Bradley Airport where the B-17 bomber went down about a year ago. And the response to that horrible incident necessitated the deployment of the aqueous film forming foam, AFFF foam. So great strides were made by the responding agencies, including DEEP and Airport Authority, to contain as much of that AFFF foam as possible to minimize the release to the environment and ultimately the damage to the environment. So as Lori was mentioning, the governor assembled the task force to evaluate PFAS. And as she mentioned, we rolled out an action plan for our state a year ago. And I see that in the chat box, there is an address where you can find the action plan. Otherwise, you can Google CT PFAS action plan. It'll take you right there. It's on DEEP's webpage. It give you all the particulars about the key recommendations that our joint agencies, with the assistance of the task force, are recommending. Now, EPA has an action plan. In Connecticut, our action plan, we are putting it into action now. We're very pleased that Governor Lamont authorized just this past July $2 million. And this is just the first step, the very first step in implementing some of the key recommendations of the action plan. Now, this $2 million is specifically for two separate activities: a take-back program for the aqueous film forming foam and sampling of drinking water supplies across the state. It's the take-back program that we are pushing the hardest on, because we feel and we know that stopping these ongoing releases of this material will be in everyone's best interest. So what we need to do is collect the stockpile of the AFFF concentrate that's located in fire departments all across the state, and also in some state institutions that have on-site uh, fire service entities. Get that material off the street and provide a new green alternative foam that does just as well as the aqueous film forming foam. Now, this stuff, it works. It does a great job. It really does. Obviously, the bad part is it sticks around forever in the environment. It does not biodegrade. So these are some of the things that we've been working on actually as we speak. That is something that our agency is very actively engaged in, identifying the appropriate alternatives to the aqueous film forming foam. And I have to connect with Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. They're the ones we're assisting them in identifying a green alternative foam. And I believe, I don't want to get in front of them, but believe that they may have shared with fire chiefs across the state what the appropriate green alternative foams are, so that they can start purchasing that material now, so that once we get going on the take back program, they'll have an alternative to rely upon. Certainly, we don't want to put anyone in harm's way. And we want our fire service agencies to be able to do their job effectively. Let's see, what else are we doing? Sampling of drinking water throughout the state. That is another key initiative. We are gearing up for that. We are working with a variety of environmental consultants that are on the state's contract to get these firms up and ready to get ready to assist us in sampling across the state. And we're not just going to go start sampling wherever haphazardly throughout the state. We want to take a systematic approach to this. And one of the first things that we started immediately after the action plan was finalized, that is a GIS project, Geographic Information System project. And what we are doing is we are plotting throughout the state of Connecticut, the locations where we have the potential for PFAS exposure, whether it's a landfill. And you could assume with the landfill, if it operated from at least the 1940s to 70s, 80s, and we even have some that are slowly slowing down right now, but coming to an end. It's a large part, the 70s and 80s is where we had a lot of landfilling occurring in the state. And we had a lot of household trash that went into those landfills. So you have the carpeting, you have the Scotchgard fabric, you have the Teflon coated pans, you name it. PFAS is in so many different consumer products. Think of all the things that may have gone into a landfill. Well, what's now coming out of a landfill? Is a landfill is properly covered and closed to prevent and minimize infiltration of rainwater and snowmelt through that waste material. Unfortunately, it is picking up PFAS within the waste inside that landfill. So we know that landfills will, in fact, be a source of PFAS pollution to the waters that, in some cases, we may be consuming. We also have industry that may utilize products, PFAS products, or may produce products that require PFAS to be applied as a coating. And what is the potential for these manufacturers to emit PFAS, either to soil and then drinking water, or to the air, which will then dissipate and actually condense and settle in potentially in the neighborhood surrounding that site. So again, we're looking at this GIS project as the opportunity to identify areas of the state that may be more vulnerable to PFAS pollution, And those are the areas that we want to go and take our sampling efforts and spend our precious state dollars looking for potential PFAS impacts in drinking water in those regions of the state. Just a quick time check. Doing okay.
All right, you got a few more minutes.
Okay. So those are some of the key things that we're working on right now. We are requiring that properties that are currently undergoing investigation and cleanup through our cleanup programs at DEEP, if there is a potential that PFAS was utilized in those activities, we are asking the responsible parties in those cases to start looking for PFAS. Again, EPA has been slow to act. Connecticut, we are with a handful of other states, I would say ahead, out front, ahead of many other states in looking for PFAS. Between the core team at DEEP and the core team of Lori's staff at Department of Public Health, together we have a fantastic group of really talented and knowledgeable folks that really take their role as public servants seriously, and we're doing whatever we can to help stop the spread of PFAS. And then once that is all set, we can turn our attention to where is it in the state and what can we do to reduce those impacts. So we are looking at filtration options. Yes, it is absolutely possible, as Adrian and Lori had mentioned. Here's the tough part. Once that contaminant has absorbed onto the carbon filter, what then do we do with that spent filter? Do you landfill it? Do you incinerate it? Is there some other option? Again, this is a forever chemical. So if we just put it in another landfill, if that landfill should have an issue, we're just releasing the PFAS all over again. So we are looking at opportunities to actually destroy the chemical. And breaking those bonds requires a very high temperature. I'll backtrack a moment on the take back program for the aqueous film forming foam. We are looking at full destruction of that foam, and it's somewhere in the order of 45,000 gallons of that concentrate. Again, it is the concentrate that is blended roughly at about a 3% solution with water to produce the foam that you see behind me. So very little produces a lot, and of course, a lot of pollution that goes along with it. So incinerating this material appropriately is, in our opinion, the way to go. Fully destroy the material and eliminate Connecticut's long-term risk to environmental liability if it were landfilled in other states beyond Connecticut. You're going to say, Adrian?
I was going to say, we want to leave at 7:40, and we'd like to leave some time for public participation.
Of course. And this is a topic that both Lori and I can spend hours upon hours upon hours chatting about.
Stopping you.
So, thank you. We are at a point in time where we are learning about the contaminant, how it behaves in the environment, how it impacts the body, how we're going to clean it up, and how the federal government is regulating it. It's all happening at the same time. So we're learning real time. And that makes it a very challenging contaminant to deal with.
Right. Well, thank you very much to both of you. I will say, obviously this is not a partisan statement, but there will be a new EPA in January, at least a new EPA director. We'll see if PFAS and PFOA are level, go up in the priority for what that new director has to do. So there's lots of questions in the queue. Lou, you want to see what the first one is?
Sure. Yeah, why don't we take one from the chat
Okay.
so that we can give folks an opportunity to raise their hands if they have questions. The first question is coming from Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. It's in reference to the Drinking Water Advisory Council, and what does the timeline look like, or estimated timeline, I guess, to develop that MCL?
You're muted, Lori. Okay.
I think you got another $1, right, Adrian? You said if I had $1 for every time someone spoke on mute.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, you got to forgive me. It's after 7:30, right? Anyway, so good question about the timeline. So our effort to get the council up and running is that we are working on that right now. We need some legislative or legal mechanism to get that started. So that's another item that we're working on. In other states, you have different laws that have maybe been stood up to create these groups. Some of them have been ad hoc groups that just got started up from just by grassroots efforts years ago or decades ago. But what we're looking to do is stand up a group that is it is a legal group that has appointed members, people that are scientists, people from the water industry, people from environmental groups, people similar to our task force, but a representative group, people from academia that would come together and put their thoughts together, study what other states have done, and tee those up. So we're looking to start the council in the year 21, in the calendar year 21. And so what that would mean is that for a maximum contaminant level is probably, I would hope that we could get the council stood up and then move forward with an actual level sometime in the year 22. I know that that is not incredibly fast, but there needs to be a process put in place to get this moving forward in our state.
Okay.
All
Anybody,
right.
if anybody wants to ask the question themselves, and instead of us reading from there's really great questions in the chat, but if you want to ask the question yourself, you got to hit the little raise the hand bar, tool there too. But go ahead, Lou, sorry.
While we're waiting for that, I will take another question, one from Ann Hewlick, one of our co-sponsors. Thank you so much, Ray and Lori. We are not in favor of incinerating foam. Will you be holding the foam until a safe option is determined? And can you talk a little bit about what type of disposal options are available for that specific product?
Good question, Anne. And I understand that incineration may not be a palatable option. It may ultimately turn out, at least for the foreseeable future, to be the only option to effectively destroy the material. And it kind of pains me to say that. So for starters, we are contemplating storage, long-term storage. At this point in time, the AFFF concentrate is not defined as a hazardous substance. So when it comes in for collection at that point in time, it is not officially a hazardous waste. However, that does not mean that we treat it any less hazardous. We certainly need to be very, very careful in how we manage that material. If we are to be hanging on to that for a long period of time, we want to conduct that activity at the right place in our state. We are contemplating a single point collection area, ideally at what's called a TSDF, a treatment, storage, disposal facility that has the appropriate license to manage hazardous materials. Again, PFAS and the AFFF concentrate, not today as we speak, being defined as a hazardous waste. We'd still want to take that appropriate precaution. I would also say that incineration is not it's not so much a foregone conclusion that that's absolutely what we are doing. We're exploring it. And again, at this point in time, it does seem to be the option to fully eliminate, destroy the product altogether. But it requires a very high temperature to break the chemical bond. And it's going to require a period of time that it's in the incineration chamber to actually do the job. The next question is what's being emitted up through the stack? That's the key thing right now. And we are watching and participating in these conversations with EPA's Office of Research and Development to determine if PFAS is destroyed thermally, what are the byproducts that may be going up the stack, if any. In theory, the incineration can do the job, in theory.
Well, and I think it's worth saying here that it's better to have the PFAS in a carbon filter and then try to figure out what to do with the carbon filter than to have it in our drinking water. So, for
Right.
me, this is about really getting it out of the drinking water. I mean, in Connecticut, there's 325,000 private wells, which means over 500,000 people are drinking from private wells. And I'm getting a private message here from someone who doesn't want to be identified, saying, what if you have a private well? What is your option to get that private well tested? I heard earlier, and then we have Bernard has his hand up. So Bernard, hang on one second. So for Lori or Ray, for those people who are on right now who have a private well or have a family member with a private well, if they're concerned about PFAS, is their only option to get it tested privately, with a private company, or what does the state do?
That's the short answer. Yes. The state does not have the equipment right now at the state laboratory. And so there are laboratories. There's a laboratory in New Haven where anyone could bring a sample to. But the difficulty, and another thing we didn't even mention, as Ray said, we could talk all night about it, is the sampling process itself is very difficult. It's so simple and easy to cross-contaminate.
Yeah.
In just the sampling procedure. So it has to be done correctly. And it's not inexpensive. So it's about $300 or $400 a sample. And that would have to be paid for by that private well owner at this moment in time. I would challenge that person back to say, how long has it been since you sampled your well just for E. coli or total coliform? The basics aren't even being sampled for. So to sample for PFAS because of a concern, I would say sample for E. coli, total coliform, arsenic, uranium, and manganese first. Understand what you're drinking, putting in your body every single day. One of the things that I see in the chat, I think it's a very good question from Dr. Pettit, is if I had my wish, what would I ask for 21 in legislation? I would ask for some basic sampling of private wells and then, wake up people to the fact that you need to know what you're putting in your body from your private well. Many of us are working from home. As you see behind me, this is not my office. This is my house. I have a private well. We should test our private wells. We should know the quality. We should know the quantity. And if you have any concerns for PFAS, you should call and speak to your local health director. That's the very first point that I'd like to say is, understand what is around you, understand where PFAS could come from. Are you in any of these areas that is of a concern? And, I'm glad, Ray and his team are moving forward with the GIS, review, the vulnerability review that his team is putting together, because that will also help us move forward with understanding where the testing should happen.
Let's, thank you for that. Also,
if I could add,
that the private well testing program is one of the recommendations that you all made through the state water plan. So I wanted to thank you for that and point that out. Bernie, do you have a question, or has your question been answered? Okay, I'm not hearing from Bernie. So I'm going to move on. The next question is from Patricia Taylor. Will the Putnam Ash landfill be one of the points on the GIS map, and the drinking water be tested near that landfill?
Will it be one of the points on the GIS map?
Correct.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Will that in and of itself necessitate sampling of that region? Not necessarily. It'll depend upon the proximity of drinking water wells, and with the Putnam Ash landfill, that site is lined on the bottom, lined on the top. So it is pretty well in tuned. I'm not saying that there is zero leachate discharge from the ash portion, but what I am saying is that it's pretty well controlled and pretty well studied. I'd like to just add for a moment to piggyback on some of the things that Lori had mentioned to the question of should I sample and how should I sample? This is a sobering thought. If you're going to look for it, the odds of you finding it in your drinking water well are pretty high. I'd say it's better than 50-50 chance that you're going to find something. And what's that from? A combination of things. Atmospheric deposition. PFAS is found all over the earth, everywhere. The furthest reaches, it is found. Moreover, so many of the products that we purchase every day have PFAS within them. Fabric softeners, different waxes, and doing laundry with apparel that has the PFAS coating on it. Where do those discharges go? Well, they either go to a wastewater treatment plant, or it's going to an on-site septic system, which is designed to filter through bacterial action to essentially remediate the discharge, so that a plume, if you will, from a septic tank just doesn't go far. But when we're adding PFAS to the mix, it is not being broken down, it is not being degraded, and it's just moving on. So whether it's from our own personal activities, or perhaps our neighbors' activities, or atmospheric deposition, the chance of actually finding PFAS in your drinking water are, I'd say, better than 50-50.
I want to, we're getting close to the 5-minute mark here. I want to acknowledge the good representative, Dr. Pettit. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any other questions, Dr. Pettit, please feel free to share them. I have one more question here in the chat. Do you get support and or cooperation or information exchange from other states or from international community, considering it could be another global problem?
Yes and yes. We are
Yeah.
we are networking with
Absolutely.
so many different people, academia, business, businesses that are in the game of finding ways to remediate, to filter. We are networking with our counterparts all across the US, in different countries, all to help share that information. When one state gets has a moment of epiphany, and they learn something of interest, they share it, and we certainly do the same.
It's a very good question. And one of the things that we talked about early on when our staff first started working together, Shannon Pokachu and Pat Pizzacki in particular, it's about 4 years ago, started working together on this issue because of Hoosick Falls and Bennington and what was going on in other states. And we've been part of a number of calls, national calls, regional calls, groups that deal with waste, groups that deal with the drinking water side. And I recently been named the president-elect of ASDWA, the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. And for the year 22, I will be the president of ASDWA. So, and it's a 3-year window of time that I get to work on national laws and national policy. And I think it's going to be an interesting time, Adrian, and I would say Lou, to be in that position, given what's happening in January and the movement of EPA in a direction that can start to address this is going to be one of the things that I'm going to continue to push for, because I think is exactly what you said, testing, and all of you have said, testing of wells, testing of what you're putting in your body every single day is something that I think is important. We've certainly learned that over the last 7 or 8 months with COVID-19, how precious life is, right? And how much public health people and the people that are on the front lines mean to us. And I will tell you, it's been an extraordinary time. And I think to put public health on a back seat, it has been a shame of it over the last 4 years. And as Ray mentioned, you see the foam behind him, to focus in on human health and public health. And it is a big issue. And it's not to be understated. We do need to move forward, but this is not the only issue that we deal with, right? There's so many other things that are on our plates at the state level. So much more to come, but with a focus, the governor's task force has certainly helped us focus on what we need to focus on and move forward with. So I'm grateful for that.
All right, well, Dr. Bill Petty has his hand up for a while, so we're going to give him the last question of the evening. Bill?
Yes, thank you. A quick comment and a question. I think it's really critical that we go from that report and get the experts, people involved here and others, because we're going to face a deluge of COVID, vaccine, economic, small business issues in 2021, and we have the budget, and they're talking billions of dollar deficit. So lining up the ducks in a row with the very specific requests on PFAS are critical. I think we have the governor's bill in line this year and 2 other separate bills related to testing and other components. So the more we can tee it up early on, the better. And the second maybe is wonky and nerd-like, and I've asked Lori this a bunch of times, and it's just, and it's not to become the world's expert, but it is found in such infinitesimal parts. I think it's important to have a good handle on what we can actually measure and what the standard deviation is and what is clinically significant, because those are sort of the basics that when people are sitting in the public hearing or the public health committee or even on the floor of the House or the Senate are going to want to know, yeah, we can truly measure this and it clinically makes a difference. So just if we can simplify that and say, yeah, we can measure down to 2 parts per trillion or 5 parts per billion or whatever it is, and this is what we think is clinically significant. I think that's important. So I don't know, Lori, how much that's moved over the past 9 months, or Ray, on the meter, the measurement issue.
Well, I just want to say though, but the state doesn't have the testing yet, doesn't have testing equipment yet, right? For PFOA and PFOS. So,
But that doesn't mean that others don't. So
I know that.
Yeah, there are private labs, and the technology continues to get better and better. It seems like, before COVID came along, we were all over watching this technology change, which seemed to happen week to week. And as Ray mentioned, we were in tune with what other states were doing and learning all the time about the technology. Now we have to be careful with that. We have to, I think one of the things that EPA does very well is the science. It may take them forever, right? You may want this process to hurry up, but because they have a very good process. They study the occurrence, they study the science, they pull together the treatability, they look at the affordability, they look at the occurrence across the country, they put that together, they have a public comment period across the country. And the shame of it is that hasn't happened in this instance. And we have to take on that business of the work that EPA normally would handle. But, Dr. Pettit, to your question, and it's a good one, because you have our toxicologists within my department that work in my branch are looking at that very point. And also our lab consultants, our laboratory people, our laboratory experts as well will be looking at those two pieces of the science, because those will be the prevalent questions to make sure you can be accurate when you pull that sample. Because it's going to make, in some cases, it's going to be millions of dollars spent on treatment. So, you know, you have to be accurate, you have to be mindful of the technology, you have to be mindful of all the research that continues on. And certainly we have the good benefit of other states' reviews and other states setting maximum contaminant levels based upon research and science.
So let me, conclude by saying this. This is we should have said this in the beginning. It's called an emerging contaminant because the work on it is still emerging, frankly. And this is not just emerging in Connecticut, but emerging throughout the nation. We will have to work hard in Connecticut to develop some type of testing for our private wells and our private well owners. It's a big task. It's not easy. There are some things we can do that don't cost money to reduce public exposure. For instance, to pass state legislation banning PFAS from being used in fast food wrappers or any food wrappers. That doesn't cost the state anything, but yet it will reduce public exposure. And that could be a very positive thing. I want to thank DEP for looking for green alternatives to the firefighting foam. That will go a long way as well. You know, we probably have to look at where there were training centers using that foam to see if there's any contamination in groundwater supplies by those fire training centers. So there's a lot of work to do. We're working on, I say we, I don't work for government, but government's working on short budgets. And these are, challenging fiscal times too. So I want to just thank DEP and the health department for joining us tonight. I want to thank the lots of folks who signed on and asked great questions. This program is being recorded. We will post it. We'll send you an email telling you where it's posted on our website so that you can have access to it. And, the more people know, though, the better off we are. And please sign up for CCE's action alerts so that you can be informed about anything going on in Connecticut, whether it's this issue or other environmental and public health issue, and always be, abreast of the news. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time very much. And thank you for all the work our agency folks do. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great to see
Thank
you all
Have a good
tonight.
night. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Lou.
Appreciate it very much.
Bye.